look at, I went and looked at the audio of the first class.
Yeah.
That you had said that you would commit to all 18, and then when there was a part in like class, I think it was like 15 or 16, where you're like, maybe. I was like, I don't think so, because it was in my iPhone. I recorded it.
Yeah.
Actually, it was before iPhone. It was in a little mic that we had.
Yeah, it's very sweet and, very precious, obviously. It's a mixed bag in New York City because there's so much going on, right? There's so many options to choose from. There's so many things, so many teachers, so many teachings. Even dharmically, there are a fair number of options, and there are good options. So, yeah, we'll see. Okay, let's start class. Since you're here, why not?
Let's try it. Sashi Bhakira Jishin Matoptram Riravling Shin Yundedam Bali Sange Shindu Mitevadi Drokun Namda Shinla Tupashok Idam Guru Ratnamanda Kamyatayami Sange Shiram Zogi Joknam Na Janshu Vardu Dakni Gaksuchi Dagi Jinyen Gipe Sonamki Drola Venchir Sange Tripasho Sange Shiram Zogi Shoknam Lan Janshu Vardu Dakni Gaksuchi Dagi Jinyen Gipe Sonamki Drola Venchir Sange Drupasho Sange Shridam Zoki Shognam La Janshu Vardu Dagni Gapsuchi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sonamki Drola Venchir Sange Drupasho.
So we'll meditate for a few moments. Please check that your spine is straight and your torso is level and comfortable. You want to still the mind and calm it and shift gears from the busyness of the day. Use a little bit of breathing meditation to bring the mind out of its active state and into a more neutral state. So please simply watch the cycle of your breath and count the rounds of exhalation and inhalation, starting on the exhalation. Count 14 rounds, just observing the breath. Bring your awareness to me, to you that is, what you call me. Just be aware of the sense of me. Feel it, think about it. Get in touch with me. Feel how strong it is, how clear it is. When you think I, what do you feel and think? What's there? Who's there? Bring your awareness to the stuff that's there, to the being that's there when you think I or me. First get very clear on where I, where me reside. Just simply, no detailed examination. When you have a clear sense of I or me and where it is, simple examination, hold that awareness and release your thoughts and your concepts and your ideas and just rest in the awareness of that place and that thing, that stuff, without any mental activity. Try to reside in I and me without any names or terms or thoughts. If you lose it, you can go back to thinking I, me, and getting clear again of where that is, the spot or that place where I, me, reside and sit right now. Get clear just on the feeling of I'm here, checking in, thinking, and then when you have that clear feeling, then again just release your thoughts and just reside in that feeling of being there. Go back and check in again. I'm here. This is where I'm sitting. This is who I am. I'm in this spot. Get very clear on it, and then make sure you have a bright, alert mind and stop thinking and just hold the feeling. Now in the middle of that spot, feel that there's a glowing holy being, very small, shining in light in the middle of that place that you're thinking of. And just see it or feel it or imagine it as clearly and brightly as you can. small glowing Buddha, radiant, filling that space. Try to maintain that awareness and go back to that awareness when you think of this spot and this space. So, homage to all holy beings. Thank you for coming. Nice to see you again. Nice to be here. Tonight we conclude the Lojong course, course 14, second half of course 14, right? So, oh, would you mind to turn the lights up a little bit? It's always hard to read if they go up any further. Thank you. That's it. Okay.
Do you want me to spin it towards you?
No, that's all right. Don't worry about it.
You know, I used to have a little lamp thing.
Thank you. So, tonight we're going to talk about, primarily we're going to talk about freedom from the four attachments. And this is another Lojong. And I'm going to just read them to you. There were a lot of Lojongs in the reading last week, right? A lot of different Lojong texts. Right? And what did we say Lojong was?
Good mind.
A good mind, mind training the mind, having a good heart, a lot of different synonymous things, right? What did we say it was to have a good mind or a good heart?
To think about this first.
Yeah, it's bodhicitta, right? Not being fixated on oneself, not thinking of what can I get for myself all the time, and I'm always first, and I'm the center of the universe, and no one else matters but me, and the purpose of existence is to gratify myself at everyone else's expense and to ignore everyone else, right? So, mind training is simply the process of having correct view, living an ethical life, right? On the Manhattan path, manifesting bodhicitta and your daily actions and interactions, right? We said much harder than many other practices, right? I mean, to actually go out and interact with your partner and your family and your kids and your coworkers and your boss and your employees. Much more difficult to go and engage all of those people with bodhicitta and with loving kindness in your heart than to do a lot of other spiritual practices. Because why? They push your buttons all the time, right? And our buttons are constantly being pushed, and there's some sort of mystical thing that happens where like everyone around us can find our buttons, right? It's like the mystical practice of finding just the right button to push at just the right time or just the wrong time, right? So Lojong is the practice of working with that, right? Of working with everyone around us and all these circumstances to actually engage in spiritual practice moment to moment, day to day, when people are, I want to say in our face, but they're just in our life, right? I mean, when we're having our momentary interactions, we're having our routine, regular, daily life interactions, right? So that's the sort of the frame of reference for Lojong and mind training and training one's heart, practicing a good heart. It's how do I actually do this moment to moment, day to day, in all my interactions with all the people that I engage with? Because that's where spiritual practice occurs, and that's where we train ourselves ultimately, and that's how we become enlightened ultimately. The only way to become enlightened is via engaging those people we're interacting with every moment of every day, right? There's not a magical pill you take, there's not a mystical thing that happens where you just say the right mantra the right number of times and poof, you pop up in fairy magic, enlightened land. It doesn't work that way. It's not how it's just it's fantasy. So the way that one becomes enlightened, the way that one reaches tantric paradise or full enlightenment, nirvana, for that matter, is by simply paying attention, moment to moment, day to day, thinking correctly, speaking correctly, acting correctly, right? And that's mind training. And that's lojong, right? So that was the frame of reference from last week, yeah. And so this week, and then we went through quite a few lojongs and talking about these things, quite a few verses. And so these verses, and lojongs can be very obvious, and lojong verses can be very obvious and very descriptive, and they can be very cryptic and very mystical, right? We started talking about some of those things last week. So this lojong is called the freedom from the four attachments, and I'll read you the 4 verses. A person who is still attached to this life is no Dharma practitioner. A person who is still attached to the 3 worlds has no renunciation. A person who is still attached to getting what they want is no bodhisattva. A person who still grasps to things has no worldview. Right? So I'll just throw it out there. Let's do them in reverse order. What do you think he means when he says, a person who still grasps to things has no worldview? He's been studying 7 years now, guys. It's over to you. Okay?
Self-existence, like thinking things come from the right side, not having correct view and the understanding of emptiness.
So when they talk about worldview, it's obviously a big tip-off. But they're talking about a person who still grasps things, right? Elaborate on the grasping to things part. Yeah, obviously you got to have correct worldview. And so how does having correct worldview tie in with not being a person who grasps to things?
If you still see things as self-existent, then you're not understanding ultimate reality.
What's that got to do with grasping things?
Holding on to the idea of self-existent things.
Well, what do you think it means to grasp to things?
I think it means to hold on to that ignorance, to that old way of thinking.
So we'd see something as self-existent, right?
Yeah.
And what happens after you see it as self-existent?
You want it, you don't want it, you go back into the cycle.
Right. In previous classes, in previous classes we went through that chain of causation of how mental afflictions arise, how the seeds for ignorance are planted and triggered, right, and ripen into self-existent ignorant grasping, and then one thereby clicks karma, and one cycles in suffering life, right? So fair bet that's what he's talking about.
So it's not just the grasping onto the object itself, but it's also the understanding of how karma works, right? The idea of karma, the laws of karma.
Yeah, so I mean this idea of grasping to things, like when I wake up in the morning, I think my wife is in bed next to me, asleep, and she is. So I'm not pretending there's no one there.
Examples.
So there's someone there sleeping in bed next to me, right? And I wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm awake. That very thought, I'm awake, is this, right? Right? The very thought, oh, my wife's still asleep over there in bed next to me, is this, right? And I get up and I think, oh, what's for breakfast, right? Or, oh, I got to go to work today. It's this, right? It's not like some abstruse, faraway, floating around the solar system kind of thing, that might be one day relevant if we understand enough. It's like every moment of every day, I think, oh, my wife's over there and she's still asleep. What a pain in the ass. She's not getting the kids ready for school, or whatever I think. I'm not saying that's what I think,
Not you. But when you say like, I have to go to work, then you're saying that you are looking at work as something self-existent, and therefore it's like the word grasping almost seems like there's a sense of yearning or an attachment to it, but it's not as gross as an attachment to, like, I'm not like excited to go to work. You're
Not
just like
craving it,
Yeah, you're not
perhaps.
craving it. You're like it seems more like a fact. Like there's something called work that I have to go to.
Yeah.
But even that subtlety is considered a grasping mentality and an
Well,
ignorant view.
And if you think about these verses are the freedom from the four attachments, right? So the word freedom, right? The connotation freedom from ignorance, freedom from suffering, right? Nirvana, freedom, right? All these sort of word plays, right? So when I think about, if I'm someone who grasps to things, well, I don't have any worldview, and I'm not free from attachment and the attendant problems of it, right? So when I wake up and I go like, oh, I'm here and I don't want to get out of bed, right? Already, I'm grasping to me as being self-existent. And grasping is a certain implication.
Mm-hmm.
I could say I'm perceiving myself as self-existent, and it's not like I'm a bad guy because I did it. I don't have any choice in the matter, right? However, the simple fact that when we walk down the street and we think, there's a wife in the bed next to me, well, I'm not walking down the street. When I wake up and I think there's a wife in the bed next to me and there's a bed and there's my pillow and it got twisted, all of these ordinary thoughts, oh, there's the alarm clock and it's too bright, right? All of these ordinary thoughts are not correct view, are incorrect worldview, right? It's like every ordinary thought, okay, the milk is too cold and it's because the refrigerator's turned down, and someone, forgot to put the food in the trash, and all the routine thoughts and all the routine processes of life, right? That's all ordinary conventional view.
Could you walk through what a correct view would be in a morning like that?
Nah.
Because I just think even in the basics, like when we're meditating and we talk about visualizing the Buddha, for instance, it feels like even that is, it's not.
It's still grasping to a thing.
It's still, is there how would one who's trying to have correct view, what would that look like? I wake up and it's, what is that? What's that? Is there no dialogue? What does that look like or sound like?
Yeah, am I supposed to not think anything?
Right, what is that?
Just wake up and go, oh.
Like,
now what?
Do you get a different wife?
Yeah.
I'm not going there, okay?
What does that look like? Is
Yeah.
that something that's...
So a very profound question. What is an alternative thought to have when one wakes up? Right? Instead of waking up and thinking, okay, I'm awake and I have to go to work. One could wake up and think, I'm awake, I need to get up and help every living being.
Mm-hmm.
And, what's here is an identity which is merely conceived, a being which is merely conceived. And I'd rather conceive of it as something else, and I'd rather relate to it as something else. Why don't I think of this as a great bodhisattva getting out of bed? Why don't I think of this as an angel getting out of bed, or as a great spiritual practitioner getting out of bed, or as a holy being getting out of bed, who's now going out, to help everyone in the world, achieve, their ultimate happiness, right? All still constructs, but very holy constructs and very powerful constructs, which serve to collect particular karmic results.
So it's not that it's not grasping though, even if that's it's not the idea of the construct. The construct is going to be there because that's
so read the whole statement is a person who still grasps to things has no worldview. So the implication there for me is self-existent things. So you have to insert self-existent in my opinion. So the very act of waking up and realizing that there is a blank screen there, which could be conceived of as anything, and which could be related to as anything, and which could serve as a valid basis for anything, right? Eliminates the grasping to a self-existent thing, and then it's a very powerful holy practice. You see.
May I give an example?
Yeah, of course, please.
I think I told Hector about this a while ago. I have a disco ball next to my window, and when the light comes in the morning, and I wake up and there's light all around the room, and so the first thing that I see is that light, and I've begun, I guess for the last half year now, imagining that every point of light is a Buddha. And I've woken up into the arms of Buddhas.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And so important that it's suffused with an understanding of the nature of reality.
Exactly. I'm
And-
choosing to see it that way.
And there's essentially, potential everywhere. Everything's a blank screen which I can project onto. And by choosing to have certain thoughts, right, and certain ideas, I'm collecting karma which will ripen in the future. And it's not that by some kind of magical thinking right now that there really are Buddhas popping up off of every reflection of light. It's understanding that how karma, emptiness, perception, and reality work to create that for oneself in the future. So, as we start to go into these things and as we start to talk about tonight's topics particularly, it's extremely important to have the frame of reference of the nature of valid perception. How does perception work, right? Because if one doesn't have a real understanding of how perception works and the nature of valid perception and how projection works, it's very hard to buy any of this. It's very hard to really believe any of this, I mean, really, at its core, Buddhism is a deep exploration of the nature of reality. At its core, Buddhism is this deep dive into the fact that our perception and our reality, as we experience it on a day-to-day basis, is subjective and not self-existent and not inherently anything from its own side. So when we start to delve into these things and we start to go into these things, it's really important to have that big picture perspective, to really step back to the macro and to make sure we're always sort of aligned at the macro level to say, Buddhism is about the nature of perception and reality. And if we don't come at it with that macro level of understanding, if we don't come at it from the perspective of, on a very deep level, I'm analyzing how I perceive and how I think and how I conceive and how I conceptualize and how I experience everything through the inputs of my senses and the mental processes and constructs and projections that arise as a result of that. And so if we're not really approaching it on that basis, it's not going to work. It just then starts to sort of devolve into some kind of crazy idea, right? And so when we start to talk about, especially these Lojong things, and it's just like, well, these are just ridiculous, crazy ideas, So, and again, as we said last week, and that's why this was a close-held, whispered lineage and not taught publicly for many centuries, because you have to be a very well-educated, advanced practitioner to really be able to relate to these things and understand these things and for them to resonate, and be useful and be meaningful, right? So, like that. So then the third one is a person who is still attached to getting what they want is no bodhisattva. What do you think?
It's a similar thing. It's grasping. It's desire.
Well, yeah, and it's a little more specific, and to my mind, it's a little more specific, right? They're talking about getting a person who wants to who's
Wants to get what they want.
Yeah, he's no bodhisattva. So how do you read that?
You should want for others.
Yeah,
For
right.
yourself.
I mean, if you're bodhisattva, you're trying to fulfill everyone else's wishes and trying to fulfill everyone else's needs. So what's the problem with wanting to get what I want?
Pretty busy.
I'm pretty busy with that. Takes a lot of time. Fills up the mind. Right. Don't have much room to think about anything else. Right. Yeah, I mean, it really is that. It's like if I'm thinking about what do I want, what's for breakfast for me, and who do I want to go out with, and what do I want to see, and every time I think about I want and I this and I that, it's displacing thinking about helping anyone else. I mean, it's just one or the other, right? So, how does one go through life thinking about what does that person want? What does that person want? What does that person want? How can I help them? And how can I help them? Right? I mean, it's a completely different way of being, right? And how many people do we know who spend their day, living to serve others and help others, right? With every thought, every moment of the day. Tall order, right? Big task. I mean, fundamental shift in a way of being. And it's not just like, let me just change the way I think 5%. No, right? And we're talking about a 180 degree turn here and just completely flipping it, right? It's like, I'm not thinking about myself all the time. I'm not thinking about myself much at all, and some kind of how can I gratify myself, and how can I serve myself, and how can I fulfill myself, right? Talking about how can I make sure everybody I bump into is happy. And it's actually very beautiful and very sweet. I'm sure everyone's done it at least once in a while, if you're in this room. You know, you've thought about other people, and you've thought about, like, how can I help this person feel good, right? I mean, just recollect it, right? I mean, it feels really nice to do it. I mean, it feels really nice to just sort of think about somebody and say, how can, I mean, it could be your dad, it could be your mom, it could be your siblings, it could be your friends, anybody, you know? It's like, you know, oh, I helped them feel really good, and it was like, oh, that felt good, that's nice, yeah, oh, yeah, right? I mean, and that's what we're talking about, right? Is that kind of feeling all day long, right? Is that kind of way of being all day long. Very hard to do it, because we're habituated. I mean, we can, you know, we can sit here and we can talk about it. We can all go, like, yeah, that feels really good. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, I can imagine, like, okay, I had that one experience, and I can imagine just like having that, stringing that together as my experiences all day long. Like it happened once, and imagine if it happened like continuously, like one after the other all day long. Yeah, I can understand that. I can relate to that. Yeah, I can see that would be nice. And then 10 seconds later, it's done, right? And we were on to other thoughts. It's out the window. We're just like, okay, my knees hurt, you know. Gotta go to the bathroom. There's noise outside. You know, right? So it's purely habituation and rehabituation. You know, habits, you know, burning new grooves, reconditioning ourselves, reprogramming ourselves. Because we get it, we understand it, right? We have experienced personally the fulfillment and the gratification and the satisfaction and the upliftment, the happiness, you know, the internal joy and fulfillment of helping others. We know for a fact. But somehow it doesn't stick. Somehow we can't keep doing it. Right? So, unfortunately, but that's why we're here, right? That's why we're talking about these things, right? Okay. Then the second is a person who's still attached to the three worlds has no renunciation. What do you think he's talking about when he talks about the three worlds?
Talking about desire, form, and formless.
Yeah, the three realms, basically. You know, I mean, we're in the desire realm, right? Which is basically a broken realm where nothing is stable, nothing works, nothing is consistent, nothing is predictable, right? So, you know, he's basically saying that, you know, if you're living for these realms, then you don't have renunciation, right? I mean, what's renunciation? What is renunciation? Uh-oh, that was a couple of years ago.
Renunciation from seeing things as self-existent.
Choosing to leave samsara, I believe. Choosing to leave the ordinary world, or the world that ordinary beings perceive as existent as we perceive it to be.
Being fed up.
Renunciation is wishing to leave it. We renounce this world, the ordinary world.
Most of us live for this life, right? Right? I mean, if you think about what motivates us throughout the day, it's for the stuff of this life, right? I'm not waking up in the morning and thinking, what can I do for my next life to make sure that I have, you know, a beautiful next rebirth, or, you know, I'm not waking up thinking, what about all my future lives after this life, right? I mean, because saying, you know, if you really have renunciation, I mean, there are different levels of renunciation, different tracks, but if you really have renunciation, you're focused on what happens after this life, right? It's like, what's going to happen to me when this life is over? Everything that I'm doing in this life is really quite low on my priority list. You know, the things that are high on my priority list are the things which are going to impact me after I die, right? So, you know, a person who's attached to the three worlds has no renunciation. You know, if we're mainly focused upon the experiences of samsaric existence, meaning the three realms, doesn't matter whether you're in the desire realm, or the form realm, or the formless realm, different degrees of suffering, different parameters, different configurations, right? All cyclical suffering realms where you just, take rebirth and take rebirth and take rebirth, and you know, some are better, some are worse, but you're locked into taking rebirth, right? So as long as we're living in a way where most of our time and energy and attention and focus is on what I'm going to do with myself today and this world, and you know, how can I gratify myself today or this week or this month or whatever it might be, you know, then we don't have renunciation. We're living for this life. We're living for, you know, what's going to happen before we die. And, I mean, think about it. Like, just, I mean, take a moment. You know, like, what percentage of our day or our life thus far has been, how do I say it? What percentage of the decisions we've made in our life thus far, work, career, relationship, allocation of hours in the day, what percentage of all that has been made in the context of what happens after I die, as opposed to what happens before I die? It's like 99.9999999% of everything we think about and do is about what I'm going to do with myself in this life, right? Well, if I'm really thinking ahead, I'm thinking about retirement, you know, which the most people aren't, right? I mean, you know, they do studies and they say people are like, sorry, people can't like think 20, 30, 40 years ahead, all right? It's too far, right? I mean, they don't. You know, like 50 or 75% of the United States has like no retirement savings. Well, okay. What about after that, right? I mean, it's not happening. By and large, it's not happening, right? So the point here is that, you know, we don't have any renunciation. We are not free from attachment if we're just sort of living this life, concerned about this life, rather than being concerned about what happens after this life. So it's like that idea. And then the first line, a person who's still attached to this life is no Dharma practitioner. So this is the one we're really going to spend more time on today. Okay. The purpose of this lojong is to get free of these four attachments. Alrighty.
He really did the Namsam Namsam in those last three. He really the three principal parts in those last three, right?
Good insight.
That renunciation, bodhicitta,
Correct view. Yeah, it's true. It's true, right? Nice, Hector.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what the first one is. How we're going to connect that to the first one.
Yeah. Well, so first a little bit about the lineage. So, because you know that's what we do.
Yeah.
So this came from Mongolia, and I don't know if you remember Genghis Khan. He conquered large parts of that world 1,000 years ago or so, 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago, right? And then he eventually died, and I mean, basically the way it worked back then was you either, you know, the Mongol hordes came to your borders and you said, welcome, here's my treasury, you know, come anytime, you know, and they rode around or rode through or rode on and happily leaving you alone, or, you know, they destroyed you and took your treasury, right? So in Tibet, they chose the former approach. So, you know, they destroyed the Mongols, you know, they went through Russia, Middle East, Persia, Northern India, you know, Vietnam, Korea, China, you know, through Moscow, you know, killed hundreds of thousands of Viennese soldiers, you know, on the edge of Europe, you know. So Tibet was just, you know, happy to pay tribute, thank you very much, you know.
I heard some Tibetans were quite the warriors too.
Yeah, in their day. I mean, you know, different centuries. I mean, it's kind of sad. I actually I started reading a history book. It was a beautiful history book. It's a very high-level history book from, you know, the dawn of recorded civilization. And so they're looking at 100-year increments, really, of what's going on, the dawn of different ages. And it doesn't matter what millennia you're in. It's like, well, there were these tribes, and they fought, and they slaughtered each other for land and for resources. And, you know, and then, you know, then there's a dark age for several hundred years, and then civilization sort of recoalesced. And then there was this next age, you know, and then there were 52 warring tribes, and eventually they killed each other, and there were only 3 warring tribes, and then they unified China, and that was one major tribe, and then, then the invaders swept in from the north, and, you know, I mean, it's just all of recorded civilization. I mean, you know, it's basically been, you know, factions, tribes, organizations fighting and killing each other for stuff, you know. material goods, money, food, land, power, whatever, right? So in this particular turn of that wheel, right? Genghis Khan had rode through, and then he died, and his son, was his son? I think it was his son. Grandson, Genghis Khan, Godin Khan. So he was, sort of 2 generations later, still collecting tribute, right? So he rode up to Tibet to collect his tribute, and no rush. They got time. They sort of conquered all the territory, so he sort of hung about a bit and sort of spent plenty of leisure time there, and started to learn a little bit about Buddhism, and a little bit attracted to Buddhism, and so started to take more and more of a keen interest in Buddhism. And so he had heard about the Sakya Pandita, who was very famous at the time, and sort of one of the greatest Buddhist teachers at the time. And he sent a message to him saying, I understand that you want to help every living being, and that you teach to help them. And so, I'd like to learn about Buddhism, and I'd like you to come and teach me Buddhism, and if you don't, I'll destroy all of Eastern Tibet and everything in it. So he agreed. He was very old at that time, and so it was. And in those days, obviously you're traveling on horseback or on foot or whatever it is, and the constant request to stop and teach along the way. And so he was concerned that Eastern Tibet would be wiped out by the time he reached Khan, and so he sent his nephew on ahead as sort of a ransom to stall, because he was very slow getting there. His name was Pakpa, and he actually went and he actually converted Khan before Sakya Pandita even arrived, and so he became the court lama of Kublai Khan in Beijing. He met Marco Polo, and he actually also invented the long mandala offering that we do. And so this commentary is by Jetsun Drapa Gyaltsen, who is very important in the Vajrayogini lineage, and he was Sakya Pandita's uncle. He's a source for a lot of teachings on Vajrayogini, especially the advanced, sobering, completion stage practices of Vajrayogini, very high practices, very holy practices. So Buddhism stretched all the way through the Mongolian Empire, then as a result, to the front lines of the Mongolian Empire. And so, for centuries. And so then eventually around the 1700s, so then the Mongolian Empire started to shrink as their influence waned and their military power started to wane. And so then the Mongolians started to pull back. And so by the 1700s, there were Mongolians who were out on the edges of Russia. And it was the fifth Dalai Lama at the time who said to them, on this night, leave the area and travel back to Mongolia. And so they did. And it was winter, and the river didn't freeze over that night. That's how normally you cross. You wait for the river to freeze. Large rivers, you wait for it to freeze, and you cross. And so the river didn't freeze that night. And so the Mongolians on the eastern side returned, and the Mongolians on the western side didn't. And so the Mongolians who were on the western side got stuck. And the Mongolian word for left behind is Kalmuk. And so they became the Kalmuk Mongolians. And so then there's a group of Kalmuk Mongolians that made their way to Howell, New Jersey. There's a great Kalmuk teacher who had a student named Geshe Wangao, who traveled to New Jersey, and he came to the United States and taught Professor Thurman, Jeffrey Hopkins, others, and then brought Holy Ken Rinpoche to the United States in 1972. And so then that Kalmuk community there supported Holy Ken Rinpoche and the temple in Howell. And of course then Holy Geshe Michael learned all this material there and passed it on to us. And so that's our lineage, and that's how we came to receive this material. And that's how we came to receive these Lojong teachings, and how you and I got here. So that's the lineage. And we use Jetsun Drapa Gyaltsen's commentary, and he's the source of some of the most secret teachings in the Vajrayogini lineage. lineage. So he says attachment to this life. When he's talking about attachment to this life, he's already assuming you're a Dharma practitioner. He's speaking of it in the context of a Dharma practitioner. He's not talking to somebody who's a farmer or who's new to Buddhism or doesn't have any understanding. He's talking to people who are full-on Buddhists, right? And so, someone who's already a good practitioner. And so, what he means when he says a person who's attached to this life is no Dharma practitioner is he means the attachments that you grew up with, attachments to the worldviews we grew up with, right? So what does that mean? I mean, it's basic psychology, right? Our mind and our views and our ideas are formed, by the time we're 7 years old, 10 years old, whatever it is, right? I mean, most of our impulses, deeply ingrained beliefs, visceral presuppositions are well established when we're young, right? If you've ever been to therapy, you know it takes a long time to change it. What happened to you when you were a kid? So what he's actually referring to is being attached to the things that you grew up with. And he's saying you've got to be free from the worldview and the attachments that you grew up with, that you got from your parents, for example, right? So, I mean, what forms our view of the world? I mean, just in a practical sense, right? I mean, when you're a kid, when you're growing up, and even now, what are the major things which affect and form our view of the world, would you say?
Go to school, get good grades.
Yeah, school, right? School is a whole worldview around school, right?
Family, community.
There's a whole worldview that you get from your family and the community you grew up with.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. Is this from, I mean, this was written so long ago, though. I mean, if your parents were Dharma practitioners.
But what does it mean to have parents who are Dharma practitioners?
Right.
So, I mean, whether your parents are educated, uneducated, Dharma practitioners or not, they have their particular views.
I see.
Right? And are they correct? Correct. Are they useful? And so we have to talk about it. But what is the impact of that, and what is the influence of that, and is it useful or is it not useful? And is it an appropriate view or is it not an appropriate view? Right? So what are other things that form our view? Work, school, family,
environment.
More specific, like nature, you mean? Like as in the natural environment?
Well, the environment you grew up with, I think, relates like school and stuff like that. Your particular situation that you're.
Or maybe the culture you're in, or the country you're in, or your community, or your socioeconomic demographic, or whatever you want to call that, right?
The race.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big one that they didn't have back when these commentaries were written that we have now. What do you guess it is?
DNA? DNA?
DNA? No, it's not what I was thinking of.
The internet.
Yeah, media. I mean, how about 30,000 media inputs a day, right? Telling you what to think and how to behave and what you should want, what you shouldn't want, and what's right and what's not right. And it's huge, right? Massive.
Paid input.
Yeah. Right? Manipulative, well-researched, affect your psyche in manipulative, intentional ways. Stuff. Right? Yeah, all those things, right? So, I mean, the worldview of our parents is one of the most dangerous things. And it doesn't mean you go to your parents and say, you guys really screwed me up, and your views are really dumb, and you don't understand the world, and you didn't get it, and and you ruined my life. It's not the point, right? But we inherited a certain view from them, a certain way of thinking about the world, a certain way of relating to the world, right? And a lot of what we believe because our parents told us that's what to believe, right? Like I tell my kids, do this, don't do that. They don't often, hopefully, they don't question it. They just do it and they become it, right? So, and it's like with countless things, right? So, I mean, it could be for better or for worse. My son came in with these incredible box shocks to fish. It's like from the time he was a little kid, like he saw somebody fishing, he was like, oh, I gotta fish. I was transfixed, you know, it's like constantly asking to fish. And like, you know, you walk along the Battery and there's people fishing off the, you know, off the west side in Battery Park, and he's like, he would refuse to leave. He just like sit down and refuse to leave. He's like, gotta see the fish being caught. Gotta, you know, I gotta fish. So, you know, in that regard, is years of reprogramming, you know, to change that behavior in a positive way. You know, that's, you know, an educated Buddhist approach to providing a worldview, right? But usually that's not the case, right? I mean, typically it's like, well, let's go hunting, son, right? Or, you know, let's go out for some beers, or, you know, it's whatever the family thinks is the right thing to do. I mean, if you grow up with a family that thinks it's sophisticated and cool to drink, then that's what you do, and that's what the kids learn, right? If you think it's you know, it's great, you know, smoking is no problem, or, you know, or hunting, or, you know, doesn't matter, you know, killing mice, or, I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? So many things. So, you know, and they're crazy wrong views, and they're absolutely no benefit to human beings. Like, to grow up thinking drinking is great, and it's cool to drink, and it's a great way to spend your time, and it's a great way to have fun, you know, is to get toasted, you know, that's a crazy wrong view. You know, it certainly doesn't help the individual in any way, and it certainly doesn't do anything for one's spiritual evolution, right? So, but if one is just brought up in their parents' worldview, that's who they become, and that's what they become, right? So, there are dozens and dozens and dozens, scores, hundreds of worldviews that we got from our parents, from our family, right? And that they taught us. And there's no other reason we think that way other than that they just conditioned us to do it, right? So the first of the 4 attachments examines the views that we've inherited from our parents and rejects the ones that are harmful, right? So school is another, right? I mean, and you know, the paradigm is go to school, work hard, get good grades, you'll get a good job, you know, you have a stable life, you'll be happy, you'll be successful, right? That's not all you learn at school. I mean, as girls, you learn to like worry about how you look, and you learn to worry about your weight, you learn to be catty, and you learn, and this is like learning about this now myself.
You learn to compete, you learn to, you know, be insecure.
Yeah, there are a lot of ridiculous viewpoints, you know? I mean, if you eat, you know, if you eat or you don't eat, it's good, it's the right thing to do. You know, if you're thin or you're whatever, it's the right thing to do. I mean, so much of what is taught in school has absolutely nothing to do with spiritual evolution. I mean, virtually nothing that's taught in school has anything to do with spiritual evolution, right? It's about being smarter, being better, being a more effective competitor, or outperforming, or being better than others with your grades, and, you know, on and on and on and on, right? And ultimately, that, you know, if you follow the rules and if you do the things you're supposed to do, you'll get a job and you'll get money and you'll be successful. Guess what? That's not the cause of success. That's not the cause of having money. You know, from a Buddhist perspective, what you're taught in school, study hard, be smart, you know, be better than others, you'll get money, you'll get a job, you'll be happy, you'll be successful. No causation whatsoever. Absolutely not. You know, the cause of money is giving, period. They don't teach that in school. So from a Buddhist perspective, from a Buddhist worldview perspective, a lot of things to unlearn, a lot of wrong ideas taught in school, right? I mean, look at the newspapers, right? I mean, what you read in the newspapers. How much of what we read in the newspapers or other sources of media are just completely messed up and completely wrong. You know, I was walking here and, you know, the U.S. bombed whatever and killed 150 people, and it was a good thing, and, you know, it's going to put an end to, you know, terrorism. Karmically, it's not, right? Not from a Buddhist perspective, it's not.
It practically went bad.
No, even conventionally, that's a whole other story, right? So.
We try to talk about values, you know, in our family, and, you know, my kid's school has core values. I mean, it's not like
It's not like they're barbarians, right?
It's not like spiritual principles can't be, you know, brought up in even media.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a wonderful thing when they are. And that's what we're aspiring to, and that's what we're wanting to inculcate. However, the point here is that most of the views that people are exposed to in their formative years and as they're being raised are wrong views, you know, and are not spiritually useful at all. You know, I mean, even how we relate to other cultures and other people, you know, I mean, you know, they're the enemy, they're not, right? They're bad, they're not. I mean, I remember I went to St. Petersburg in the 80s, I think it was the early, God, I don't remember when, like 20, 30 years ago, I went to St. Petersburg, you know, and it's like, you know, they're the Russians, and, you know, be careful what you say, and be careful what you do, and they're out to get us, and, you know, they could arrest you if you, like, do the wrong thing. And they're just people, you know, everywhere you go, they're people, right? And so we have all these crazy ideas about enemy, friend, you know. Wrong views, right? So, anyway, so what school's taught us, got to examine it, right? I mean, what our culture teaches us, got to examine it, right? I mean, church is another one, right? I mean, people who grew up in a Christian environment like I did, you know, you grew up thinking that there's a creator God, there's a big guy in the sky who's in charge of everything, right? And that somehow he's making everything happen. And you know, I mean, I've been studying, practicing Buddhism for decades, right? And so it's still like, you know, when something happens, it's like, oh my God! You know? I mean, it's just there, right? It's like deep in there, right?
Thank God.
Yeah, right? I mean...
I heard it today from a Buddhist. At
Right.
the house, actually.
Oh yeah, I remember asking Geshe Tashi for secret mantra to help the mice in my house leave because I wouldn't kill them. And he said, oh my God, no. It's funny how it's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, the most obvious thing is we believe that, or some part of us, most of us in Western culture, having been brought up in Christian culture, believe that there's some creator that's responsible for everything. And it just, you know, it doesn't make any sense. We know it's irrational, right? I mean, we know it's illogical. Like there's somebody who's ultimately compassionate, who can do anything, who makes everything, pulls all the strings, in charge of it all, and can make, you know, a baby that's never had a straight thought suffer and die, you know, in short order, you know, in a very painful way. It just doesn't make any sense. There's absolutely no logical rationale behind it, you know. So, and what's the point, you know? So, it's primitive, you know. So, I mean, you talk to people in other cultures, and they're like, they hear you know, if they hear you from a Christian place, they're like, oh, I hear you drink God's blood. You know, no, you transform as wine. You transform it. Well, you transform wine into blood and then you drink it. You know, it sounds kind of strange. It sounds like kind of a weird religion. You know, and then like, where did they say the world came from? Well, you know, there was God made a man, and then he wanted to make some more things, so he pulled out a rib, you know, and he turned it into a woman. And then they were happy, like everything was phenomenal, everything was perfect, but then they ate an apple and they were totally screwed because they ate an apple, you know, and then like there's like countless billions upon billions of beings that have horrible suffering because they ate an apple. Like, they don't get it. I really don't get it. You know. And besides, everybody knows that the world came from, you know, a turtle that was rolled upside down and mated with a rabbit, and that's where the world came from. You know. It was equally silly. And there's, you know, multiple cultures all over the world have similar, like, it was the antelope and the, you know, and the, I don't know what it was, you know, the monkey or something that, you know, mated and brought about the first creatures into the world. I mean, there's all these sort of crazy stories, and none of them make any sense. We just happen to be brought up with the one about the guy with the apple and the ribs, you know? And because we were like, you know, teeny tiny, and they told us, and they made us go to CCD every week, you know, and they're like, beat it into us. We're like, oh, okay, I accept that. Okay, don't hit me, you know. You know, and then we get to a point where we're like afraid to question it. You know, it's like, you know, you gotta like whisper because it's like blasphemy, right? You gotta see who's looking when you talk, just in case, you know, somebody hears you, right? So you have to examine that worldview, right? I mean, is it a horrible, evil, terrible thing to believe that somebody else created the world? Yeah, it is. Why? Because it prevents us from taking personal responsibility for everything, for all of our actions, for all of our thoughts, and for all of our deeds, right? And there's this huge hurdle that we have to get over. It's particularly harmful to us when we feel like we are not personally responsible for every single thing in our lives. Like, did any of us grow up in a family, a culture, a society, a church, a school, where people said to us, you are responsible for every single thing that happens to you. You caused every single thing that happens to you. And everything you do right now is going to cause every single thing that happens to you in the future. Absolutely not. That's spiritual truth. That's correct worldview. And so we have this incredible spiritual obstacle that we don't think that way, and we don't relate to the world that way, and we don't see the world that way, right? So in fact, it is quite a huge problem that we were raised in this other system, with this other way of seeing the world and relating to the world, right? It gets in the way of believing the laws of karma, right? And it's a huge spiritual obstacle that we have to fix. So, if I say that the proof that the laws of karma are true, right, is that everything comes from something similar. Like produces like. The cause and the result are similar. And one came from the previous instance, right? It sounds too simple, right? And it's just like, yeah, maybe, but, right? Could be, but no way to prove it, whatever, okay, never mind, right? I mean, we don't really believe it, It's not like bells are ringing and light bulbs are going off and we're going like, yes, finally, I got it, this is it. I'm gonna live my life this way, right? It's not. It's not how we respond when we hear these things. It's not like, finally, the answer to everything, finally, finally, a way to end all suffering forever, finally, a way to be happy every moment of every day, finally, I know what to do with my life every second of every day. Doesn't happen. It's not. You talk about it, hear it, and you're like, right? So, huge spiritual obstacle, right? So it's a spiritual blinder, right? And these worldview obstacles, they're put there by past karma, right? Manifest through culture, church, parents, and they're flatly wrong. And they're very hard to get rid of. They're very hard to take, these blinders are hard to take off. It's like a horse trying to take off its own blinders, right? Very difficult to do, almost impossible. I mean, imagine if you hadn't met Dharma, hadn't heard teachings on emptiness, right? From Holy Geshe Michael and others. Would you ever conceive other levels of reality in this way? No, absolutely not. No. Almost impossible. So, the worldview where we're thinking about taking personal responsibility for everything is how we need to go through every day. Every single thing is cause. Every single thing I do is creating my future reality. And every single thing I'm experiencing, I caused in the past, right? Having an ordinary worldview, the worldviews that we were brought up with by our parents and our church and our school and our culture and all the rest, keep us trapped here. They are the very things which cause us to indefinitely exist in a suffering realm, in suffering realms and forever, right? They are the things which keep us trapped here, right? And we're stuck here as a result. And we have to overcome those worldviews, right? The notion that what's in the newspaper or what's in the magazine is truth. I mean, I used to really kind of blow me away. My mom, when she was alive, she'd be like, I read it in Prevention magazine. It's like, she'd like cite some information, And so like the great truth, the great statement of truth was, I read it in Prevention magazine. But therefore it's true, right? Same thing. I read it in the New York Times, right? I read it on the blog. It's like this.
It's footnoted, so it must be so.
There's an academic reference there. Right? So, the notion that all these things are important, true, let alone valid, we're wasting our life on this stuff. We are spending our life on this stuff. We are burning the hours of our day and the moments of our life on this stuff. Engaging with it and believing it and thinking it's important and thinking it's relevant, and especially thinking it's true and it's important reality. I mean, that's, I think, a nice way to say it. Thinking that reality is really important. Thinking that the reality that I read about, the ordinary reality that I read about in the New York Times is important somehow. It's not. It's absolutely not. You know, it's completely irrelevant. You know, even conventionally, virtually nothing that's in that paper is going to impact my daily life in a personal, direct, and immediate way. And it's certainly not useful in terms of a correct view of how things are caused or what's spiritually meaningful or spiritually relevant, right? So
So do you read the Times?
no, but I got the London Times History of the World. Which, you know, interestingly, I read it and I think, oh, okay, this is what happened in 10,000 BC, and how interesting. You know, this is the initial formation of civilization, and this is the initial, you know, rise of blah, blah, blah. You know, and again, it's thinking like, oh, that's fact. That concretely happened in the past, right? And it's a very interesting element of understanding emptiness and the nature of reality to think there is no fixed past. There is no definitive history of the past. Were there people that evolved from monkeys however many millions of years ago? Could be. Is it self-existently true? Absolutely not. You know? Like, is it true that there's an atomic bomb? Yeah, for us right now. Was it true that there was an atomic bomb 100 years ago? No. No, there was no such thing as an atomic bomb 100 years ago, right? Why did an atomic bomb come into existence, 60 years ago, 70 years ago? Right? Well, scientists figured out that if you do this thing with atoms, they split too fast and then they blow up and it creates this huge, explosion. Okay, that's what happens, but why did it come into existence, right? Why did it come into being? Why did it start to exist, right? Right? And we have to make the distinction between the how and the why, right? I mean, science describes how, right? But karma explains why things happen, right? So, and if you think it's hard to get over the hurdle of Creator God, how about getting over the hurdle of self-existent scientific truth, right? That's really hard, right? Like National Geographic did an article some years ago where they were talking about the human body. And they had the whole human body and a little arrow and everything, every organ and every bit, and it's saying, okay, this is how, it was on aging, this is how the skin ages, and this is what happens, and this is how muscle ages, and this is what happens. This is how the eyeball ages, and this is what happens. This is how this organ ages, and this is what happens, right? And it went on through this whole thing. And at the bottom, they went on to say, and we don't know why. It was this thing where they were saying, this is how you get old, but we don't know why you get old. And we don't know why people age at different rates. And the body completely regenerates itself every 7 years. And we don't know why it stops doing that after a certain number of cycles. Right? It's like magic, Don't know why it's alive in the first place. Don't know why every 7 years it completely rebuilds itself. And we don't know why it stops doing that eventually. Why does life drain out of some faster than others? And so, that's karma explains that. Science doesn't explain that. So, and it's really hard. It's really hard to live in a way where you think science isn't self-existently correct, right? I mean, 50 years ago, that's maybe too soon. If you told someone 100 years ago that I could sit comfortably in a chair and fly through the sky without any effort on my part, they'd be like, "You're whack, man." I don't know what, it'd be just ludicrous, right? And we do that now, If you told somebody, 200 years ago that I could travel to the other side of the planet, in a day, they'd be like, "No, it's impossible," right? I mean, if you told somebody 50 years ago, I could buy anything I want.
Tell me about these things.
Yeah, 50 years ago, I could buy anything I want from anywhere, like without leaving my apartment, by pushing a few buttons. You're like, talking about, right? Right? I mean, even if you told somebody, I don't know when those came about, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you can have every possible piece of information in your pocket. You can have like real-time information about, what the weather is anywhere in the world. You can have real-time information about traffic